Long before maps or railroads tamed the mighty Appalachians, this wilderness remained a mystery to the outside world. However, in the early 1800s, one man and his faithful pig would change the course of American history. Solomon Jones was a bulldozer of a man, standing 6 foot 2 inches tall in his socks and weighing in at over 200 pounds. But don't let this mountain man's exterior fool you. He was a true visionary that changed the course of American history. Buckle up for the incredible true story of Solomon Jones. Our story begins in 1802 in the mountains of western North Carolina, in an area that is now known as Henderson County. It's here, near the head of Mud Creek, that Solomon Jones drew his first breath. His grandparents were Welsh immigrants who had braved the great Atlantic until they landed on the shores of South Carolina. With little more than grit in their bones and faith in their hearts, they pressed into the wilderness, carving out a home in the rugged folds of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And from that same hardy stock, Solomon Jones was born, carrying within him that same restless pioneer spirit. Even as a boy, Solomon had a wild streak of adventure. While other children might linger in front of the morning fireplace, Solomon would slip off into the woods at first light, roaming barefoot through the laurel thickets and the pine groves. His father owned a 400-acre farm, and there the mountains were his playground and his teacher. Every holler and its ridge was his classroom. He studied the white-tailed deer as they slipped silent down game trails, noted how the black bear favored the easy bends of the ridges, and watched his turkey pick their way through hidden coves. To Solomon, it seemed the animals had been born with maps etched into their minds. Somehow, they knew exactly which way to turn to avoid steep bluffs, or how to cross a stream without missing a step. He followed their tracks for miles, memorizing the secret footpaths that would wind through the gorges and over the Blue Ridge lines. Like most boys in those days, Solomon never set a single foot inside a schoolhouse, mostly because there weren't any to be found in these parts. But don't get the wrong idea. Ignorance never touched him. And Solomon, well, he was sharp as a fox in a henhouse at midnight. And let's face it, some of the wisest people Solomon had ever met didn't own a sheepskin paper from some fancy college. What they had instead was common sense. And in the mountains, common sense was worth more than gold. By the time Solomon was 20, he married a mountain girl named Mary Hamilton. And for a spell, he worked as a property surveyor, pacing out land with little more than his sharp eye. He raised 500 turkeys and 500 hogs, and each year when the fall rolled around, he drove them on the long, punishing trip over the mountains to the markets down in Greenville, South Carolina. It was a grueling journey that tested both man and beast. The trails twisted like snakes around the ridges, and the weather would turn against him without warning. Still, Solomon never complained. He just shouldered the burden with a steady patience that only mountain folks possessed, because he knew that market day meant bread on the table and some change in his pocket. Life in those years moved at a snail's pace, slowed by the heavy hand of isolation. The mighty railroad that would one day carve through the mountains and link the high country to the folks down in flatland country was still decades away, and to mountaineers, that seemed as distant as the stars. There were no real roads to speak of, only old animal trails that cut through the woods, narrow tracks where sometimes a mule and his sled could pass if the weather had been good. But more often than not, travel was slow, dangerous, and often downright impossible. And then there was that mighty wall of mountains, looming a few miles from Solomon's homestead. a towering ridge of granite and timber that separated North and South Carolina. To look upon that wall was to gaze at a fortress built by God's own hand, with its ridges rising so high that they seemed to touch the sky itself. No, there were no roads across them, no safe passage for wagons or herds, and this made trade nearly impossible for the people that stretched out their lives on either side. Folks would look down to the valleys and see the promise of markets and goods that lay beyond, but the mountains stood between them like a great stone barrier. Now you have to keep in mind that back in those days, there wasn't any government infrastructure to speak of, no crews of men laying out highways, no bridges, no iron rails stretching across the ridges. The people of the high country lived in a world where you either had to make it do or you did without. And in such a world, a man like Solomon Jones would soon rise up and leave his mark on this world. By 1840, at 38 years of age, Solomon Jones decided to do something downright revolutionary. He was going to build himself a road over that mighty wall of mountains that split the Carolinas like a great stone barricade. But folks just laughed the notion clean out of town. "It can't be done," they scoffed. "Why, them government engineers already came through here with their fancy contraptions and their maps, their compasses, and a whole army of men. They studied every ridge and holler, and after months of jawing and figuring, they all threw up their hands and said it weren't possible. And here's Solomon Jones, a man who's never had a single lick of schooling, no blasting powder, and no team of engineers, and not so much as a mule team to haul rock. He don't have nary a chance." But Solomon was cut from a different cloth. He didn't measure impossibility by a surveyor's rod. He measured it by grit. And so, with nothing more than a stubborn streak and a vision burning in his heart, he set out to do what no man had dared. And when folks saw how he planned to do it, they nearly split their sides laughing, because Solomon's chief engineer, who was responsible for finding the roadbed through the wilderness, was none other than his pet pig, Susie. That's right, a hog. Solomon reckoned that Susie, with her natural instincts, could nose out the easiest path through the steep ridges and the rocky gorges. And what a sight it must have been in them days. Solomon, tall and broad-shoulders, holding on to Susie's curly tail with one hand and swinging a machete with the other, chopping bushes and clearing a path as both of them clambered up and over the mountain. Day after day, season after season, they trudged through the hills and the hollers together, Solomon sweating and hacking through the laurel hills, while Susie rooted her way through the underbrush. For nearly a year, man and pig made that climb over the mountain and back, wearing out boots and toughening Solomon's hands like rawhide. To the locals, it was pure foolishness. But at last, after countless miles and 1,000 blisters, they had finally traced out the perfect route, a path that no surveyor could chart, born instead from the instincts of a hog and the stubborn faith of a mountain man who refused to believe in the impossible. But then the real challenge came. You see, it wasn't enough just to trace a path, and Solomon didn't have a single stick of dynamite, nor the money to buy it. But what he did have was the patience of Job. Whenever he came to a boulder that was too big to move, he'd study it, looking for the tiniest crack or weakness. And then into those crevices, he would hammer wedges of oak or hickory, dry as tinder when he first drove them in. And then he would leave it to the mercy of the rain. And as the months passed, the wood would swell, pressing tighter and tighter, until the great stone would finally split and burst open. Other times, Solomon turned to fire. He'd stack logs and brush around those stubborn rocks, and he would feed the flames until they got hotter and hotter. Then he'd heave buckets of cold spring mountain water onto the blaze. The sudden shock would make the rocks burst open. It was slow, back-breaking work, but bit by bit, the mountains gave way beneath his hands. The further Solomon went, the more trials rose up against him. Landslides swallowed whole sections of his cut. Storms undid weeks of labor in a single night. His hands blistered and bled, and still he pressed on. And if that weren't enough, landowners began dragging him into court, furious over this new fandangled road that he dared to carve across their land holdings. For 8 solid years, he battled the mountains and the men who opposed him, until at last in 1848, Solomon Jones stood victorious. Against all odds, he had secured the legal right-of-ways and somehow cut a road clean over the barrier that had divided the Carolinas since the beginning of time. And this wasn't just any road. The road was laid out like an artist, painting a masterpiece, choosing every bend and curve to frame the beauty of the land. He carved out a path that revealed sweeping vistas, shaded hollers, and the kind of scenery that made a traveler stop and catch their breaths and whisper a prayer of thanks. And what a road it was! For the first time, mules pulling heavy wagons no longer balked at the climb, and even women riding side straddle could make the journey with ease. A trip that once took weary weeks could now be made in a matter of hours. Engineers from far and wide came to marvel while shaking their heads at the genius of it all. Solomon's road followed the lowest grades, slipped through natural gaps, and was built at the lowest cost imaginable, a feat of ingenuity that no book could have ever taught. And Solomon had a businessman's mind too. He quickly set up a toll gate and charged a fee to every traveler who passed through this new highway. Almost overnight, the toll road changed the entire economy of Transylvania County, North Carolina, and Greenville County, South Carolina. For the first time, farm crops, livestock, and hand-hewn goods now rolled easily down into the valleys. Wagons full of corn and apples and hams and wood, bound for the bustling markets where they fetched more money than the mountain folks had ever seen. And perhaps the sweetest twist of all was that those same farmers and landowners who had once hauled Solomon into court were now singing his praises to high heaven. Their land was once only worth a handful of pennies an acre and was now suddenly worth over $75 an acre. That road would become known far and wide as the very first scenic highway in the Carolinas. Folks from all over America came dressed in their Sunday best, loaded into buggies and wagons, and made the climb just for the pleasure of it. They came to breathe the crisp mountaintop air and let their eyes drink in the endless sweep of blue ridges that faded into the horizon. For his work, Solomon purchased over 4,000 acres of land that surrounded the new road, and he maintained homes on both sides of the mountain in North and South Carolina. And soon, he hired men and formed road crews that built many more important roads, all while following the instinct of his faithful sow. He built Casher's Valley Road in Transylvania County, then the Flat Rock to Green River Turnpike, and even bought a 3,000-foot tall mountain that he named Hebron Mountain. And then he carved a road to the top, where he built an observation tower made of locust wood, just for tourists. It was here, at this tower, where another visionary who would one day build railroads all across America, George Vanderbilt, stood on Solomon's Mountain and looked out over the peaks and was so inspired that he bought nearly 100,000 acres of land that is now known as Pisgah National Forest. And then he built the world-famous Biltmore Castle. That's right. Solomon Jones was a true visionary, and many say he single-handedly was the original founder of Appalachia's scenic roads. People came from everywhere to travel on his breathtaking byways, and Solomon spent the fortune he made trying to improve the lives of his fellow hillsmen. You see, he realized that the two most important things a mountaineer needed to improve his life were good roads and access to education. Solomon built the roads, and he even provided the money to start the first public schools in the area. And when Civil War broke out, Solomon refused to fight in the war. And while most of the men were away fighting in the conflict, Solomon took care of over 80 widows, women, and children, providing food for them. Eventually, he was thrown in jail for refusing to fight, but the South Carolina governor pardoned him due to all the other families who depended on him. During his lifetime, Solomon Jones fathered 12 children and raised many orphan children who were abandoned or given to him. He was truly the Johnny Appleseed of Appalachia. He possessed an inward stirring to replenish the earth. Along each of the roads that he built, he would sow grass, scatter locust seed, and plant precious fruit trees that would conserve the soil from erosion. By 1999, Solomon Jones died at the ripe old age of 97 years old. That day, the French Broad Hustler newspaper printed the following at his death. Solomon Jones was one of the most remarkable engineers of his age. He used no instruments, but his ingenious mind was never exceeded by even the most challenging barriers of the Appalachian Mountains. He remains the most noted road builder this section has ever known. Don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back with more of Solomon Jones' story right after this message from our sponsors. Hey guys, JD Phillips here from the Appalachian Storyteller. Today's video is sponsored by tnnursery.net. Family owned and operated in the heart of Appalachia, TN Nursery ships beautiful plants and trees all across America. Perennials, ferns, vines, trees, and much, much more. Click the link in the description to shop America's favorite garden shop. For quality landscaping trees and plants, get 15% off of your order by using promo code STORYTELLER at checkout.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling. 4 books for the young and old alike that will make your heart smile. Click the link below to order your copy of the Appalachian Storyteller today.
Solomon spent the last years of his life in the house that he built near his observation tower in Henderson, North Carolina. Today, his body is still buried there. His tombstone reads, "Here lies Solomon Jones, a true patriot who labored for 50 years to leave the world a better place than when he found it." By the turn of the 1900s, government and state agencies began improving America's infrastructure, and Solomon's famous road that connected the Carolinas was hard on the modern automobile. So, by 1910, it was no longer being maintained. Instead, it was replaced by U.S. Highway 276. As for the 4,000 acres that Solomon owned around his famous road in South Carolina, well, today it's named in his honor as Jones Gap State Park. Today, scenic roads such as the Smoky Mountains Foothill Parkway or the Cherlahala Skyway and even the Blue Ridge Parkway all owe their creation to Solomon Jones, who was America's first scenic road builder. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'd like to leave you with this. Did you know that the Appalachian Storyteller is watched all around the world by over 2 million people a month? Yet, 60% of them aren't subscribed to this channel. If you enjoyed this true story, please click the subscribe and like button, or share your thoughts about Solomon Jones. Those actions are the single most important things you can do to help support this channel and the preservation of true stories from Appalachia's past. Till next time, my friends, I'll see you.